Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am Bulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. With just 2 more years until the presidential primary, as people are starting to do exploratory committees and everything right now, there is a little bit of a discussion as to who the 2024 GOP frontrunner is. I got this article from LibertyNation.com. Is Trump still the 2024 GOP frontrunner? Will the Republican base take a different direction for the next presidential election? This is an opinion piece by Jeff Charles. A new straw poll has revealed some rather surprising results regarding conservative attitudes about the 2024 presidential election. At a recent summit, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis edged out former President Donald Trump as a preferred candidate for the next presidential race. Now, while this is only one survey and the election is still years away, is it possible that the signals are shifting the base? The poll surveyed participants at the 2021 Western Conservative Summit held by the Centennial Institute. The Daily Wire noted that the company used an approval method that allowed participants to vote for multiple responses for each question, including a question about which 2024 presidential candidate they approved of from the dozens of the top contenders. According to the Centennial Institute, the top 5 candidates in order of most approval to least were Ron DeSantis with 74%, Donald Trump with 71%, Senator Ted Cruz with 43%, Mike Pompeo with 39%, and Senator Tim Scott with 36%. Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence registered a lowly 10th place on this list. Earlier this year, the Conservative Political Action Conference conducted its own study. The results revealed that if Trump decided to run again, 55% of respondents would vote for him. Meanwhile, 21% indicated that they would vote for DeSantis. With Trump still enjoying widespread popularity on the right, what would explain these results? Despite no longer occupying the Oval Office and being censored on social media, the former president has assumed more of a kingmaker role as he takes aim at establishment Republicans who oppose his agenda. He still wields tremendous influence in the conservative movement. Now, on the other hand, DeSantis has made quite a name for himself. His staunch opposition to COVID-19 lockdown orders and his refusal to bow to pressure from the left has raised his star considerably. Moreover, like Trump, he has not shied away from getting down in the dirt with activist media that have attacked him relentlessly. DeSantis has taken a Trumpian, pugilistic approach to media activists, aggressively savaging them when they are caught lying about him. But perhaps DeSantis' appeal lies more with what he doesn't do rather than what he does do. Unlike Trump, DeSantis has not found himself embroiled in petty feuds with members of the media, celebrities, or others who criticize him. He has avoided the social media gaffes that the former president made. To put it simply, the governor has Trump's strengths, which made it popular with the base without the former president's weaknesses, which turned out people who went solidly in the MAGA camp. Much can change before the 2024 arrives, but the results from the straw poll may just be an early glimpse into the road the conservative movement will take going forward. And that's what I mean. Okay, I live in Florida. Ron DeSantis is my governor, and I agree with a lot of what he is doing. Now whether he should run in 2024 is still up in the air, especially as he's planning a second gubernatorial term in 2022, or for the 2022 election, and possibly against the Attorney General Nikki Fried. But there's this from the Washington Times on whether Trump looms over early over early jockeying of 2024 GOP hopefuls. Trump looms over the shadow primary and early jockeying of 2024 GOP hopefuls. Senator Rand Paul is headed north to Cleveland this weekend, but not for the pierogies. The Kentuckian is trekking to Ohio to throw his political might behind Mike Gibbons' bid for the competitive Republican nomination for U.S. Senate. Mr. Paul is among a group of high-profile Republicans making moves in the 2022 midterm elections in a way that seizes the media's attention, boosts their appeal among grassroots activists, and maybe helps the party seize power in Congress. Welcome to the early jockeying among the 2024 potential presidential contenders. Searching for street cred with voters, the early underdogs are rushing to lift candidates across the country through their endorsements, public appearances, and fundraising events. Nikki Haley, a former ambassador to the United Nations, will go to Iowa next week to deliver the keynote address at the state Republican Party's biggest fundraiser of the year. Former Vice President Mike Pence will cruise into Iowa next month to lend his hand in the fight for control of the House. Senators Ted Cruz of Texas and Tom Cotton of Arkansas have been making noise on the endorsement front. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has also been lending his support to Republican candidates. The shadow primary is on, said Craig Robinson, a veteran Republican Party strategist based in Iowa. The cycle is different because of the presence of former President Trump. He casts a long shadow in it. Hours earlier, Mr. Trump issued a statement. In case you missed it, it's Donald Trump's party. Mr. Trump led the party when it lost both chambers of Congress and the White House. He is shaking up races with his endorsements, including in North Carolina, where he is backing Representative Ted Budd's bid in a high-profile race that will help determine whether Democrats maintain control of the 50-50 Senate. Polls show Mr. Trump is the most beloved of the possible 2024 candidates. He is often followed in popularity by Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who has, according to his staff, been focused on his re-election race in 2022. After Trump and DeSantis, you have all these other people who are trying to carve out space, Mr. Robinson said. From what I'm seeing, there are people who have a lot of work to do if they want to be viewed as strong contenders in this presidential race. The dynamic has upped the ante on Mr. Pence. Mr. Pence plans to return to the first-in-the-nation caucus state of Iowa to headline Representative Randy Feastra's inaugural Feastra family picnic at the Dean Classic Car Museum in Sioux Center. The Pence itinerary includes an appearance at the Family Leadership Summit in Des Moines. Mr. Pompeo and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem are scheduled to appear at the event for Christian values advocates. Mr. Pompeo is also scheduled to deliver a speech next week at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Texas. The event is sure to be packed with evangelicals, a crucial bloc, and Republican primary contest. The Pence pilgrimage to Iowa marks his first trip to the state since the 2020 presidential election campaign. It will provide another snapshot of whether Trump supporters still like him after he refused to go all in on Mr. Trump's unproven claims that the Democrats stole the election. Mr. Pence received a warm welcome this month when he delivered the keynote address at the annual Lincoln-Reagan dinner held by the Hillsborough County Republicans in Manchester, New Hampshire. I came here to say that the time is now for every patriotic American who shares our ideals and values to stand up and fight back against the agenda of the radical left, Mr. Pence said. He said he has learned from Mr. Trump. I think President Trump shows what Republicans can accomplish when our leaders stand firm on conservative principles and don't back down. Mr. Pence also launched the Advancing American Freedom Political Advocacy Group, signed on to the fundraising solicitations from the National Republican Congressional Committee, and headlined a pair of fundraisers with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, California Republican. He has endorsed former Trump White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders' bid for governor in Arkansas, and the re-election bid of Senators Jerry Moran of Kansas and Todd Young of Indiana. The slate of possible White House hopefuls have been giving a lot of attention to Iowa 4 years after Mr. Cruz emerged victorious in the caucuses and Mr. Trump finished second. Ms. Haley, a former governor of South Carolina, is slated to be in Iowa for the first time this year when she heads the state Republican Party's annual Lincoln Day dinner in Des Moines. She has established the Stand for America PAC, which will serve as her vehicle to help White House and Senate candidates. She also threw her support behind Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, who has yet to formally announce her re-election bid, and Republican gubernatorial nominee Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. In addition to the money she raised for her PAC, she helped pull in $250,000 for Republicans running in various races. She has endorsed or held fundraisers for 8 female members of the House seeking re-election. Taking back the House and Senate and electing GOP governors is Ambassador Haley's top priority, said Haley's spokesperson Shelley Denton. She is laser focused on the 2022 election cycle. Through SFA PAC, she's supporting conservative fighters who believe that America is inherently good and have the courage to speak up even in the toughest environments. Mr. Pompeo recently launched the Champion American Values Political Action Committee and was the first of the likely presidential contenders to show up in Iowa. He headlined the West Side Conservative Club in Urbandale. There is an important checkpoint between now and 2024. These elections in 2022 will have a real impact on how 2024 ultimately goes as well. Mr. Pompeo said, "It is why I am here today. It is why I am going to continue to go out and campaign." He added, "If we get 2022 right, 2024 will solve itself." Mr. Pompeo has been busy making endorsements. He backed Republicans running in New York, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska. He also backed the gubernatorial bids of Ms. Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas and Representative Lee Zeldin in New York. Now, Mr. Cruz has supported Representative Ken Buck's re-election race in Colorado's 4th Congressional District and Amanda Atkins in Kansas's 3rd Congressional District, along with 2 female contenders in Texas, Monica De La Cruz Hernandez in the 15th Congressional District and Susan Red in the 6th Congressional District. I'm confident that Susan will work with me and strong conservatives to secure the border, to rebuild our economy, and to bring our Texas values to the Washington Swamp, Mr. Cruz said on social media this week. So right there we see a few more. Now, full disclosure, in 2020, or rather in 2016, I supported Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul for president, because I feel that those 3 are spot on. If Rubio runs in for the presidency, it might mark the first time that 2 Floridians have joined the race for presidency in 2024, or for the presidency ever, and it'll be quite interesting to see what happens. But yeah, so I mean, things are getting rather interesting. I'm looking forward to keeping eyes on that, and even the Daily Mail even says Florida Governor Ron DeSantis beats Trump in the 2024 straw poll. And it says conservative Republicans named Ron DeSantis as their choice for the 2024 presidential nominee at a summit this weekend, giving the Florida governor their seal of approval over Donald Trump. DeSantis led his straw poll of presidential contenders at the Western Conservative Summit with 75% to Trump 72%. Organizers at the summit, which was hosted by Colorado Christian University Centennial Institute, asked both the 500 in-person and thousands of online attendees to make their top 2024 picks among 31 candidates, which consisted of leading Republican names and a smattering of Democrats, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Michelle Obama. DeSantis came out on top, and former Vice President Mike Pence, who is known for his strong conservative support, came in near the bottom of the GOP choices, even trailing Donald Trump Jr., the eldest son of the former president. Ted Cruz came in 3rd with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in 4th, and you can see the straw poll here. You have DeSantis, Trump, Cruz, Pompeo, Tim Scott, who could be another interesting person to follow. Kristi Noem, Tom Cotton, Rand Paul, Donald Trump Jr., and Mike Pence. And it says, it remains early in the presidential process as both parties focus on next year's midterm election. No GOP White House contender is formally announced, and even former President Trump has played coy about whether he will seek a second term. But in June, Trump told Fox News that if he did run again, he would consider putting DeSantis on the ticket over Pence. Sure, I would certainly consider on, Trump told Fox Business' Stuart Varney. I know him very well. He's a great guy, Trump said. The Western Conservative Summit, billed as the largest gathering of conservatives outside Washington, D.C., has conducted straw polls for president since 2010. Him and Kane won the first straw poll in 2011, followed by Florida Senator Marco Rubio in 2012 and Cruz in 2013. Ben Carson topped the poll in 2014 and 2015. None of the presidential contenders addressed this year's summit. DeSantis is a first-term governor and a close Trump ally. Trump endorsed his gubernatorial campaign and hosts him frequently at Mar-a-Lago, his private club in Palm Beach. DeSantis became a national figure during the COVID pandemic when he won praise from conservatives for his resistance to COVID lockdowns and other restrictive measures, even at times against the advice of health officials. He also called Florida an oasis of freedom as the pandemic raged. He also signed a controversial bill last month that would curb voting access, allowing only Fox News Insider to witness the signing. Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, told the Washington Examiner he doesn't think DeSantis would challenge the former president. Governor DeSantis won't even. He's asked over and over and over again every time I'm in his presence. He's been asked, are you running in 2024? He noted. His answer has been consistent. He's running for re-election for a governor of the state that not only he loves, but one that is, quite frankly, well run because of his leadership, he said. DeSantis is up for a second term as governor in 2022 and has remained coy about any presidential ambitions as he keeps his focus on that contest. Democrats are already using the 2024 reports against him, arguing to Florida voters that if they give DeSantis a second term, he will immediately pivot to a White House race. The Florida governor came in second to Trump in late February at a straw poll at CPAC, the largest gathering of conservative activists in the country. He won a second straw poll that did not include the former president. Trump, meanwhile, is returning to the campaign trail. He'll hold a rally in Ohio on Saturday in support of his former White House aide Max Miller, who is running a primary campaign against Republican Representative Anthony Gonzalez. One of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump for his role in the January 6th insurrection. Pompeo and Pence have also been in the GOP speaking and fundraising circuit as they weigh their 2024 options. Pence was booed and called a traitor at the Conservative Faith and Freedom Coalition event in Orlando on Friday. It's great to be back on the road with so many patriots dedicated to faith and freedom and the road to the majority, Pence said at the Road to Majority themed event. As he began thanking Ralph Reed, the head of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, he was met with boos and people loudly shouting traitor. Pence and Trump had a falling out when Trump, in the lead up to the January 6th certification of the 2020 presidential results, pressured Pence to try and stop Joe Biden's victory. Pence, who had no constitutional authority to do what Trump requested, refused to entertain the idea. Trump railed publicly against his long loyal vice president. The MAGA rioters who stormed the Capitol were heard yelling, "Hang Mike." Earlier this month, Pence tried to argue that he was still on Trump's good side, telling an audience at the Lincoln Reagan dinner in Manchester, New Hampshire, that he's spoken to Trump many times since they left office. He admitted, however, that they do not see eye to eye on the January 6th insurrection. But I will always be proud of what we've accomplished to the American people over the last 4 years, Pence said. And I will not allow Democrats or their allies in the media to use one tragic day to discredit the aspirations of millions of Americans, he added. He told the audience that he learned a lot serving alongside President Donald Trump. Some people think we're a little bit different, the ex-Veep said. I think what President Trump showed us was that what Republicans can accomplish when our leaders stand firm on conservative principles and don't back down. Now, that is a very Very, very wise, very true, very interesting statement by former Vice President Pence. So, I mean, I really don't think that the Vice President does have constitutional authority to overturn the certification. You know, 'cause, I mean, basically, it's basically up to both houses of Congress to to do that, and we've seen that many times, both in 2020 when there were two states in which both a, a House member and a senator had said that we object to the counting of this state's electoral votes. So that means that they separated and debated it and then came back. So, like I said, that was interesting, and it'll be interesting to see just what Pence does in 2024, or rather, should I say, in 2023, when or if he puts his name in. But and then there's this article from BizPack Review. For the first time, DeSantis tops Trump and all GOP comers in the 2024 presidential straw poll. Despite former President Donald Trump's undeniable grip on the Republican Party, he lost this week in a 2024 presidential straw poll to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis, whose light has been shining brightly in the party because of his handling of the coronavirus pandemic and his willingness to combat big tech censorship and left-wing rioting, earned a 74.12% approval rating versus Trump's 71.43 approval rating. Conducted among 371 participants at this weekend's Western Conference Summit in Denver, which ended Saturday, the poll specifically looked at which candidates you approve of for president in 2024. The poll this weekend marked the first instance of DeSantis beating Trump in such polls. Now keep in mind that participants were allowed to name as many people as they liked. Coming in third and fourth place were Senator Ted Cruz and former CIA Director Mike Pompeo at 42.86% and 39.35% respectively. 32 names total came up, including the names of Democrats like John Kasich, Andrew Cuomo, and Michael Bloomberg. It's presumed that these votes came from the liberal journalists who were in attendance at the conference. Most of the votes went to Republicans, ranging from the ones mentioned above to Senator Tim Scott, 35.58%, South Carolina Governor Kristi Noem, 29.92%, etc. Surprisingly, former President Mike Pence scored only at 21.56%. Centennial Institute tweeted out on Sunday, Western Conservative Summit 2021 nonpartisan approval voting poll results. Top 5 were DeSantis, Trump, Cruz, Pompeo, and Scott. 30 candidates polled, Democrats and Republicans. There is still anger among some segments of the pro-Trump base over Pence's decision to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election during the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority conference, which started Thursday and concluded Saturday. He was heckled and called a traitor by some in the crowd as he took the stage. C-SPAN tweeted out, "Watch, former President Mike Pence was met with heckles and chants of traitor as he took the stage Friday at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority conference in Kissimmee, Florida." Trump, who has shown interest in perhaps running for re-election in 2024, has made it clear that if he does, Pence won't necessarily be by his side. As for DeSantis, it's not clear how Trump feels about the Florida governor potentially running for president. What's known is that he was ruthless and savage in his denouncement during the 2016 presidential election of his GOP primary challengers. It's also not clear whether DeSantis will even run in 2024. Part of the problem is that he's absolutely running for re-election as governor in 2022. If he wins, it seems unlikely that he will abandon his job willy-nilly for an unguaranteed chance at the presidency. But if he does run, he'll certainly have the infrastructure in place needed to make a serious go at the presidency. His political action committee, friends of Ron DeSantis, had nearly $40 million cash on hand as of late last month. BizPac Review tweeted out on May 30th. DeSantis is a fundraising powerhouse, collecting $5.1 million in May as war chest approaches $40 million. DeSantis did not fare as well in the straw poll conducted in February at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando. Limited to just one vote, 55% of participants chose Trump, and only 22% chose DeSantis. Benny Johnson tweeted out on February 28th, top 3, Trump 55%, DeSantis 21%, Noem 4%. Meanwhile, another poll published around that time by USA Today showed that 42% of Republican voters were willing to switch parties if Trump abandoned the GOP and launched his own party. The poll also found that 60% of voters favored him running in 2024, 76% were willing to support his nomination in the GOP primary, and 85% were ready to vote for him in the 2024 general election. While DeSantis may be a rising star, but he does not yet possess numbers like these. BizPac Review tweeted out February 22nd, wake-up call for GOP, poll shows staggering number of Trump voters ready to abandon party for him. DeSantis isn't the only Republican who'd likely be fated to fail if he tried to run against Trump in 2024. So were all the Republicans who voted to impeach or convict the former president earlier this year, especially Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney. Ever since the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol, Cheney has centered her entire existence within the Republican Party on opposing the former president. This obsessive animosity cost the Congresswoman her chair seat on House Republican Conference. Bo Snerdley, who was Rush Limbaugh's observer and former call screener in the early days of the Rush Limbaugh program, tweeted out on May 13th, Trump responds after Cheney booted from GOP leadership, vowing to keep him away from Oval Office. Anti-Trump rhetoric and behavior is also poised to cost the Congresswoman her congressional seat. Internal polling conducted for Trump's PAC in January and more recently for the pro-Trump Club for Growth show a majority of Wyoming Republicans disapproving of Cheney and showing strong support for Trump, Politico reported last month. The collapse in support is a remarkable fall from grace for Cheney, who just last year passed on an open Senate seat in her state to remain in House leadership instead. And that's that, but yeah, so it's bound to be very interesting to see just what'll happen in 2024 as most of the pieces are slowly beginning to come together, even though we have only about 2 years out. First on the list is the 2022 midterms. See if the Republicans regain control of both houses of Congress, or if the Democrats have a bigger edge. But leave a comment down below what you think about DeSantis beating Trump in the straw polls. Also, what do you think about DeSantis overall? If you live in Florida, do you support him as governor? Let me know in the comments down below. I have the articles linked in the show notes down below. And I'll see you in the next video. Last week I talked about Ivory Hecker of Fox 26 in Houston interrupting herself in the middle of a reporting to say that she is going to speak with Project Veritas. Well, there's another newscaster, this time from CBS 62 in Detroit. Got this from the Newsweek, and it says CBS local anchor announces on air she's going to Project Veritas to complain about her station. A local CBS News TV journalist announced Sunday during her weather report that she'll be blowing the whistle on what she sees as discrimination at her Detroit station, marking the second time in a week that a reporter seemingly blew up her career with an off-script announcement designed to embarrass her employer. On Sunday, April Moss of CBS 62 interrupted herself to say, "I will be sitting down this week with Project Veritas to discuss the discrimination that CBS is enforcing on its employees," before casually finishing her weather report. Last Monday, Avery Hecker of Fox 26 in Houston similarly interrupted herself in the middle of reporting to say, "I want to let you, the viewers, know that Fox Corp has been muzzling me to keep certain information from you, the viewers. And from what I'm gathering, I'm not the only reporter being subjected to this. I'm going to be releasing some recordings about what goes on behind the scenes at Fox because it applies to you, the viewers." Newsweek reached out to Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe for more detail, but he said only that he will be interviewing Moss just as he did Hecker. Now with Hecker, his presentations included secretly recorded video of the anchor interacting with the bosses, though it's unclear if similar video exists with Moss. Hecker's secret recordings came a day later and showed her editors berating her for interviewing a doctor who used hydroxychloroquine to treat patients with COVID-19. "We know it's a drug that's been politicized up the wazoo. We use it with good success," Houston Dr. Joseph Aaron told Hecker. So her boss told her, "You failed as a reporter for posting such a story." Hecker also showed insider footage of her boss objecting to any story involving Bitcoin, since such stories would not play for a poor African-American audience at 5 p.m. O'Keefe is known for posting undercover videos that he says show a bias against conservatives and in favor of liberals, and he usually delivers several on a single topic, this latest being news anchors announcing on air their whistleblowing intentions. He would not say if he has others lined up beyond Hecker and Moss. He will presumably release his Moss video later today or Tuesday. Hecker was reportedly fired after her stunt last week. Newsweek has reached out to CBS News for comment and will update this report should the outlet owned by Viacom CBS respond. O'Keefe has for years been a scourge on the left, often targeted by activists like Media Matters for America and other progressive groups who accuse him of manipulating video to fit his narrative, though he sometimes posts hours of raw video with the intention of proving otherwise. And I had seen the video that April Moss had. You know, she starts off her video just saying Happy Father's Day and talking a little bit about the weather on Sunday and then the beginning of the week. Then she just casually inserted in the fact that she was going to be speaking with Project Veritas and then continue on. You know, so I, for one, am definitely going to be interested in finding out what she has to say about it, as well as other people. As a matter of fact, here's an article from the Gateway Pundit that says, I will be sitting down with Project Veritas. CBS 62 reporter blows whistle on network discrimination on air during weather report. CBS 62 reporter April Moss blew the whistle on the network discrimination on air during a weather report. April Moss's revelation follows Fox 26 reporter Avery Hecker's actions exposing Fox 26. "I will be sitting down this week with Project Veritas," Moss said. And there's a tweet that says, breaking CBS 62 insider April Moss blows whistle on network discrimination on air during weather report. Following Fox 26 reporter Avery Hecker's brave actions, "I will be sitting down this week with Project Veritas, hashtag CBS 62 whistleblower." Now, the Fox 26 reporter who went mega viral last Monday night for announcing that she went to Project Veritas about the company live on air has been suspended. Last Tuesday, Project Veritas released recording of Fox News Corp supervisor telling Hecker to cease and desist posting on hydroxychloroquine, the life-saving drug touted by President Trump. And yeah, so turns out Avery Hecker has been fired after that, so I'm looking forward to to finding out what her reaction is. There is another reaction which I'll get to in a little bit about a former Arizona anchor who had basically just quit on air. But yeah, and there's this from the Epoch Times, and actually there is a small video within this tweet, so I might play that in a minute. But first, let's go right to the article. Epoch Times, or local CBS anchor criticizes network live on air over discrimination. We'll go to Project Veritas. A CBS 62 weather reporter, April Moss, said live on the air that she will expose the network for alleged discrimination that CBS is enforcing on its employees and will provide material to whistleblower platform Project Veritas. During a Sunday segment on the weather from Metro Detroit, where the CBS affiliate station is based, Moss abruptly stopped her normal broadcast and made an announcement. And speaking of a brand new week, I will be sitting down this week with Project Veritas to discuss the discrimination that CBS is enforcing upon its employees. Tune in to Project Veritas for my full story, she said, without elaborating on the nature of the alleged discrimination. Following her report, Moss seamlessly continued on with her weather report. Project Veritas appeared to endorse Moss's announcement in a tweet on Monday, with Veritas Chief of Staff Eric Spracklin saying her announcement takes serious guts. Previously, Project Veritas released secret recordings of CNN staffers who admitted that they skewed their news coverage towards former President Donald Trump. Here's a tweet, and actually, let me make a little clip here, and I will play this video. It's about 51 seconds long.
Good evening, and thanks for watching First Forecast. I'm meteorologist April Moss, and happy Father's Day. Today we saw temperatures above normal again, topping out at 85 degrees at Metro Airport. Plenty of sunshine today, but all good things must come to an end, and that starts as early as tomorrow morning with showers moving in around 8 a.m. And speaking of a brand new week, I will be sitting down this week with Project Veritas to discuss the discrimination.
Now right there, notice, if I back it up just a couple of seconds, listen to it one more time.
This week with Project Veritas to discuss.
That's a little too far. That's a little too close. Listen one more time.
8 a.m. And speaking of a brand new week, I will be sitting down this week with Project Veritas to discuss the discrimination.
I loved how she just worked that in, just started out with the weather, then said, and speaking of a brand new week, perfect segue in. I'll play the rest of the video.
Discrimination that CBS is enforcing upon its employees. Tune in to Project Veritas for my full story. Now, later Monday, we will see those showers continuing through late morning, but by evening, we'll see dry conditions and more comfortable temperatures as well.
The article goes on to say Moss has worked at CBS 62 since 2012, according to her profile. Moss is the second local reporter to make such an announcement in recent days. Fox 26 Houston reporter Avery Hecker earlier this month said during a live segment that she would go to Project Veritas. I want to let you, the viewers, know that Fox Corp has been muzzling me to keep certain information from you, the viewers, Hecker added, adding that she would release some recordings about what goes on behind the scenes at Fox. Later, she told a conservative leading watchdog group that the Fox station told Hecker to stop posting about the drug hydroxychloroquine as being a potential treatment for COVID-19. Hecker also alleged that network managers rejected her pitch to cover Bitcoin because it won't appeal to black viewers. A day later, Fox 26 terminated Hecker from her position last week. In a statement, Fox 26 said it fired her because it adheres to the highest editorial standards of accuracy and impartiality, adding this incident involves nothing more than a disgruntled former employee seeking publicity by promoting a false narrative produced through selective editing and misrepresentation. The Epoch Times has contacted CBS 62 for comment. Now, it's interesting that this is coming out now, but then again, we have been used to it. There is another video that as soon as I find, I might post it in another video segment on this. But yeah, this is definitely something to keep eyes on, especially considering as how all of this started with the former Arizona anchor. This coming from TV spy over at adweek.com. Former Arizona anchor calls journalists working with Project Veritas Sisters in Truth. Former KSAZ anchor Carrie Lake is siding with the two local journalists who use their TV time to promote undercover videos that they claim show wrongdoing at their stations. Hey, corrupt news media, your days are numbered. People are waking up to your propaganda, bias, and lies, Lake wrote on Facebook. To the honest journalists still working in the fake news, do the right thing and get out. Way to go, brave sisters in truth, April Moss and Ivory Hecker. Courage is contagious. Last week, former KRIV reporter Ivory Hecker started her live shot at the Houston Fox-owned station by telling viewers that the station owner was muzzling her, and she had the tapes to prove it. Hecker was fired for the stunt, and it was later revealed in those tapes that KRIV news managers rejected her pitch to cover a story about Bitcoin during the station's early evening newscast because they would not appeal to viewers. Now on Sunday, WWJ meteorologist April Moss stopped her forecast halfway through to tell Detroit viewers that she was going to reveal discrimination at CBS. Both reporters are working with the conservative activist group Project Veritas, which has previously released undercover recordings from news outlets in efforts to discredit them. Lake, who was no stranger to controversy while working at the Fox-owned Phoenix station, announced in May that she would run for governor of Arizona a few months after she left KSAZ. And that's that, but yeah, so things are looking up for people who are speaking out against discrimination in the news. We've been seeing it at the national level with Amy Robach over at ABC, and even James O'Keefe had mentioned some with CNN. We've also seen it with social media, where insiders from Facebook, Twitter, and Google coming out and speaking out against discrimination and bias there. And now we're going into the local area. So I'll be keeping eyes on it and let you know in the days and weeks to come what's happening. Leave a comment down below what you think about the CBS local reporter speaking with Project Veritas. Do you agree that she's doing the right thing? Do you disagree? What do you think about the former Arizona anchor siding with the Houston CBS and former Houston or Detroit CBS and former Houston Fox reporters speaking with Project Veritas? Leave a comment down below. The articles for that I had just read will be in the show notes, and I'll see you in the next video. Yesterday in the Senate, the Republicans had filibustered H.R. 1, which is the Democrats' landmark bill for the 2021-2022 congressional session. It is the For the People Act. I've spoken on it a few times in past videos, so if you want, go back and check them out. But yesterday was what some people would call, and my good friends at the Daily Signal bring it out, a huge win for democracy. GOP blocks federal election takeover. This by Fred Lucas. An attempted federal takeover of elections was thwarted Tuesday as Senate Republicans voted to block further debate on the legislation. with Vice President Kamala Harris presiding and prepared to cast a potential tie-breaking vote. The Senate divided 50-50 on a straight party line vote. It would have taken 60 votes to proceed to debate and a vote. If enacted into law, the bill would ban most state voter ID laws, expand ballot harvesting, prevent the updating of voter registration lists, establish taxpayer-financed campaigns, and require states to allow same-day voter registration, among many other things. Framing the matter as one of voting rights, Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer of New York was the first to speak on the Senate floor immediately after the big vote. Once again, the Senate Republican minority has launched a partisan blockade of a pressing issue here in the United States Senate, an issue no less fundamental than the right to vote, Schumer said. This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party. The Senate Democrat leader vowed the bill would return. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line, Schumer said. Democrat sponsors called their bill the For the People Act. Republican critics dubbed it the Corrupt Politicians Act. This is a huge win for the citizens of the United States. This is a huge win for democracy, and it's a huge win for the integrity of elections, Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas said. The Corrupt Politicians Act is the most dangerous legislation we've considered in the 9 years I've served in this body. It's an attempt by Senate Democrats of a brazen power grab to federalize elections and to ensure Democrats won't lose control for the next 100 years. Cruz continued, "This bill isn't about the right to vote, it's precisely the opposite. It's about taking away the right to vote from the citizens and instead giving it to the corrupt politicians in Washington who want to stay in power." Earlier Tuesday, Schumer announced that Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Democrat, would vote for the 800-page bill. As with nearly all Senate legislation, the relatively moderate Manchin and Democrat Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, who also voted for it, are key swing votes in the divided Senate. The House had already passed its version of the Democrats' legislation, known as H.R. 1. The Senate Rules and Administration Committee voted along party lines 9-9, but the bill still moved to the Senate floor. Before the vote Tuesday, President Joe Biden urged the Senate to pass the measure in a tweet, claiming that democracy is in peril here in America. President Biden tweeted out, "We can't sit idly by while democracy is in peril here in America. We need to protect the sacred right to vote and ensure we the people choose our leaders, the very foundation on which our democracy rests. We urgently need the For the People Act. Send it to my desk." Cruz noted that 36 states have enacted voter ID laws, but the vast majority of them would be repealed under the bill. A Rasmussen Reports poll found 75% of Americans support voter ID requirements. Now, meanwhile, Cruz noted that 31 states prohibit ballot harvesting, which allows political operatives to collect large numbers of absentee ballots from election offices to solicit votes for their candidates. The Democrats' bill would expand ballot harvesting. The bill would also create a partisan advantage on the Federal Election Commission, a panel that since its inception in 1975 has been made up of an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. The legislation would also require that unelected redistricting commissions draw congressional district boundaries, which now are determined by elected state legislatures in most states. The Democrats' bill also includes restrictions on political speech, such as requiring disclosure of donors to independent groups that buy political ads. That would be akin to the donor disclosure requirements that some state governments sought to impose on civil rights groups in the 1950s, which could result in donors being subjected to intimidation. Under the provision, the government would contribute to the campaigns of federal candidates $6 for every $1 raised in small donations, that is, for every donation under $200. The legislation also would authorize the Internal Revenue Service to investigate and consider the political and policy positions of nonprofit organizations as they apply for tax exempt status. It's a recipe for undermining confidence in our elections and remaking our entire system of government to satisfy one far end of the political spectrum, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky said on the bill on the Senate floor before the vote. When it comes to our elections, policymakers should be focused on one goal, making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, Hans von Spakovsky, manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation, said in a statement. Oh, by the way, the Daily Signal is a news outlet of the Heritage Foundation. Ron Switkowski continued, sadly, this legislation does the opposite. In reality, this mammoth leftist takeover of elections threatens election security and compromises every American's fundamental right to vote. It would require nationwide implementation of the worst changes in the election rules from the 2020 election and go even further in their voting and eliminating basic security protocols that states have in place. Now, I agree with Ron Switkowski on that, and I mean it's just basically good that the Republicans had called for its unfortunate end. But yeah, so I mean it's good, it's interesting. And we have this article from foxnews.com, which basically speaks about how rotten it is. As a matter of fact, the headline is entitled, Republicans block rotten election reform bill in Senate as VP Harris presides over debate. GOP uses filibuster to stop debate on Democrats' top priority S1. Senate Republicans Tuesday blocked sweeping legislation on election and campaign finance reforms that Democrats said is crucial to ensuring voting rights and saving democracy, but the GOP blasted as a partisan power grab. The For the People Act needed 60 votes to clear a procedural vote in the Senate Tuesday, but Republicans filibustered and killed the legislation from advancing to debate. No Republicans joined with the 50 Democrats on the motion to proceed. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky said Republicans won't stand for Democrats' attempt to impose new voting standards on states that would rig elections in their favor. He called the substance of the nearly 900-page bill rotten to its core. Leader McConnell tweeted out, the rotten inner workings of Democrats' S1 power grab have been thoroughly exposed to the light. Whichever label Democrats slap on their bill, the substance remains the same. Now, Republicans took issue with imposing federal standards on state legislation or state elections that they said would weaken state ID requirements. They also opposed starting a new public financing system for congressional elections and politicizing the Federal Elections Commission that enforces campaign finance laws. Even GOP moderate Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said she couldn't support the partisan federal takeover of the election system. In a floor speech, she said she'd back elements of the bill and co-sponsor the separate John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but can't back Democrats' one-size-fits-all reforms. Democrats with the White House on their side framed the legislation as an urgent priority to save democracy in the face of GOP efforts in state legislatures around the country to pass voter suppression laws in the wake of former President Trump's 2020 election loss and unsubstantiated claims of widespread voter fraud. And there's a statement that I had mentioned in the Daily Signal about Biden saying democracy is in peril and that the right to vote is under assault with an intensity and aggressiveness. Now, voting rights have been such a concern for the White House that Vice President Kamala Harris presided over the debate on the Senate floor Tuesday evening and announced a failed 50-50 vote, after which she said the White House is committed to ensuring access to the polls. The fight is not over, she told reporters at the Capitol. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer of New York accused the GOP of being afraid to debate the merits of the voting rights because they'd be forced to defend their efforts to disenfranchise voters. I want to be clear about what just happened on the Senate floor. Schumer said immediately following the vote, every single Senate Republican voted against starting debate on legislation to protect Americans' voting rights. He added, this vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party. The For the People Act was numbered H.R. 1 and S1 in the House and Senate to signify it was a top priority of Democrat leadership. The House already passed the bill already passed the House with no GOP support. The voting rights legislation, if enacted, would take aim at big dollar donors and dark money in politics by requiring additional disclosure of campaign donors and disclaimers on political advertising. Presidential candidates would also be required to release their tax returns. It was set up a new 61 public matching financing system for congressional elections to encourage more grassroots donations and require states to adopt independent redistricting commissions to prevent partisan gerrymandering. And the legislation would set basic standards for states to run elections, such as mandating at least 15 days of early voting, setting up automatic voter registration, and permitting the use of student IDs or sworn written statements in states that have voter identification requirements. Now, while all 50 states were united in moving to debate the bill, or rather, while all 50 Democrats were united in moving to debate the bill with Senator Joe Manchin striking a last-minute deal with Schumer, Democrats are deeply divided on what to do next. A top Democrat political advisor criticized his own party for wasting time on the S1 legislation that won't pass. Dimitri Melhorn, a key confidant to Democrat funder Reid Hoffman, argues the legislative push was setting the party up for failure and dragging me and my country off a cliff. According to a report in Politico, progressives are demanding that Senate Democrats get rid of the legislative filibuster so they can pass the sweeping election reforms, DC statehood bill, gun control and police reform bills without any GOP support. But Manchin and Arizona Senator Kirsten Sinema have doubled down on their effort to eliminating the filibuster, meaning any pathway forward on voting reforms would need GOP support. And there's also this from Breitbart.com: Senate blocks Democrats' election power grab bill. Senate Republicans blocked a signature Democrat election bill that would radically transform America's electoral system and grant the federal government more control over the country's elections. The Senate voted 50-50, failing to meet the 60-vote threshold needed to advance the debate on S1, the For the People Act. This prevents the Senate from voting on the legislation. The legislation would federalize America's electoral system, which has drawn strong opposition from Republicans. Among other things, the legislation would federalize control over congressional elections, declare that standard state and local maintenance of election systems, such as purging ineligible voters from voter rolls, limiting vote by mail, requiring voter ID, and establishing rules against felons voting where they erode the right to vote, require all challenges to the law to be filed in the federal courts in Washington, D.C., dominated by judges appointed by Democrat presidents, establish online and automatic voter registration, protect illegal immigrants from prosecution if they vote, establish same-day voter registration, register minors to vote, mandate early voting, establish nationwide vote by mail without a voter ID, and allow ballots to be counted 10 days after Election Day. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer of New York said ahead of the vote that reactionary state legislatures' election integrity bills amount to voter suppression. Schumer on voting bill. Are we at a backslide here in the 21st century? Are we going to let reactionary state legislators drag us back into the muck of voter suppression? Are we going to let the most dishonest president in history vote to poison our democracy? That in a tweet from Chad Pilgrim, Senate Majority Leader, or rather Senate Republican Leader Mitch McConnell, said on the Senate floor that ahead of the vote that the legislation would serve as a Democrat power grab. Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin said in a statement ahead of the vote, the For the People Act is another Orwellian-named bill that has nothing to do with voting rights, but everything to do with consolidating Democrat control over government and our lives. Republicans want to restore confidence in our elections by making it easier to vote, but hard to cheat. It seems like Democrats primarily want to make it easier to cheat. Why else would they propose eliminating voter ID laws, require ballot harvesting and mail and drop boxes, make the FEC a partisan agency, and make it harder to maintain accurate voter files?
They would also force taxpayers to help fund the campaigns of candidates they oppose. An accurate name for this monstrosity would be the For Democrat Politicians Act. Ahead of the vote, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican of Tennessee, said the bill would perpetuate a Democrat majority and would serve as an incumbent dream. Now, although the vote was expected to fall short of the 60 votes necessary to clear the cloture rules, Schumer held the vote anyway. Blackburn told Breitbart News that he held the vote to placate Democrats' leftist space. Blackburn said this is about positioning for him. In my opinion, he's concerned that he is going to have a primary challenge from AOC. He is watching very closely what is happening on his left flank. They're trying to keep the left is really in charge of the Democrat Party right now. Republican Senator Johnny Ernst of Iowa said in a statement after the vote, as a former local elections commissioner in Montgomery County, it's clear as day to me that this radical partisan bill isn't about democracy. It's about changing the rules and tipping the scales to favor Washington Democrats. This partisan attempt to take over America's elections would force Iowa taxpayers to pay for politicians' campaigns, eliminate popular voter ID requirements at the polls, and put Washington, D.C. bureaucrats in charge of America's local and state-run election systems. She added, we should call this what it is, a power grab, and fully reject it. And they did, and we could very well see the Democrats try it again, but I think the only way that they would try it again is one, if they win the 2022 midterms and bring it up again in 2023, and or maybe see about bringing it back up sometime towards the end of the year, if at all possible. I don't know what's in the mind of Chuck Schumer, but knowing him, he'll try almost anything. And there's this from justthenews.com, John Solomon's site. Democrats face hard choices after the election overhaul bill fails in the Senate. Republicans signal that they will oppose Democrat alternatives to the For the People Act, but could budget reconciliation be used to pass parts of it? By Nicholas Balassi. Democrats in Congress face hard choices about how to proceed with enacting President Biden's agenda after Republicans successfully blocked the Democrats' election overhaul bill, the For the People Act, from enacting in the chamber on Tuesday. Senate Democrats now turn to the budget reconciliation process to circumvent the legislative filibuster and pass key parts of Biden's agenda. Some Republicans are already opposing the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, H.R. 4, as an alternative to the For the People Act, referred to as H.R. 1 in the House and S1 in the Senate. If you put the federal government in charge of everything again, they will gut things like voter ID laws. They're going to make it more difficult to maintain accurate voter files. They're going to require ballot harvesting. Republican Senator Ron Johnson told Just the News, conservatives view H.R. 4 as H.R. 1 in disguise. I think that we should resist any temptation to have a federal takeover of elections, and whether that's called H.R. 1 or H.R. 4 doesn't particularly matter to me. Jason Sneed of the Honest Elections Project told Just the News, I think that right now what you see on the progressive left is achievement of H.R. 4 as a backup plan. It's also about finding discrimination in voting, and yet it does not use any objective metrics to figure out which states are supposedly discriminating in voting, said Sneed. Instead, it targets practices like voter ID laws and procedures to clean up voter rolls. Sneed also said that H.R. 4 would give the federal government the power to prevent states from implementing a requirement for voters to show an ID to cast a ballot. Democrats are likely more motivated now to push a partisan reconciliation bill through Congress without GOP votes after the GOP stopped the Democrats' election overhaul effort using the legislative filibuster. A bill that passed the Democrat-led House to set up a commission to investigate the January 6th riot also recently failed to advance in the Senate. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer and Senate Budget Chairman Bernie Sanders have started the process of adding elements of Biden's agenda to a large-scale budget reconciliation bill, regardless of the outcome of ongoing bipartisan negotiations on infrastructure. Schumer has said that the reconciliation bill would include parts of Biden's $2.25 trillion American Jobs Plan and $1.8 trillion American Families Plan that are not included in a potential bipartisan agreement on infrastructure spending. The contents of the reconciliation package have not been finalized. I think there are large numbers of people in our caucus, and I sympathize with this, who will not vote for a bipartisan bill unless they are quite certain what it's going to be in reconciliation, Schumer said last week. On Tuesday, ahead of the For the People Act vote, Schumer made clear that Democrats are proceeding with the reconciliation bill to avoid the filibuster. There's a chance Senate Democrats could try adding some of the language from the For the People Act into a budget reconciliation bill, such as the provisions related to spending taxpayer dollars to match donations to candidates of up to $200 at a 6-to-1 ratio. One thing voters are going to also hate in this bill too is having their taxpayer money go to fund campaigns. $6 of federal funding, taxpayer spending, for every dollar that candidates raise through low-dollar donors, said Johnson. You're forcing people to support candidates and policies and ideologies that they utterly oppose. That's not going to go over very well either. And it's unclear whether the Senate parliamentarian will allow these provisions to stand in a reconciliation bill. Now, there is a whole heck of a lot happening in the Senate along these lines, as well as along other lines. I will keep you updated as to what is happening there. Leave a comment down below what you think of the Republicans blocking of HR 1/S1, the For the People Act. Also, what do you think of the Democrats trying to basically do an end around the filibuster by using the Reconciliation Act? I'll have links to the articles in the show notes below, and I'll see you in the next video.
President Joe Biden spoke on gun prevention measures yesterday. This coming from the Daily Signal, and it's by Fred Lucas. Biden backs gun control, not defunding police, and new executive actions. President Joe Biden announced a host of executive actions on Wednesday, many of them backing up his long-standing support for gun control, and others distancing himself from fellow Democrats who want to defund the police. The Second Amendment from the day it was passed limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own, Biden asserted. You couldn't buy a cannon. Biden then went on to make a somewhat unclear reference to Thomas Jefferson's famous Tree of Liberty quote. The Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Breaking 911 tweeted out, and there's a video here. Biden, those who say the blood of patriots, and all that stuff, how we're gonna have to move against the government. If you think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. And the point is that there has always been the ability to rationally limit, the type of weapon that can be owned and who could own it. Joined in the White House dining room by Attorney General Merrick Garland, Biden discussed new multi-jurisdictional firearms trafficking strike forces to stop illegal gun trafficking across state lines. The strike forces will be in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Washington, D.C. Cities that have seen some of the largest upticks in violent crime. According to the National Commission on COVID-19 and Criminal Justice, homicides rose 30% in 2020 from the previous year. Further, homicides in the first quarter of 2021 were 24% higher than in the first quarter of 2020 and 49% higher than in the first quarter of 2019. Gun assaults increased by 8% in large cities last year. An effective violent crime reduction strategy must also address the illegal trafficking of firearms and focus on keeping guns out of the wrong hands, Garland said. Biden referenced his long history in the Senate of pushing for gun control laws, I've been at this a long time. There are things we know that work to reduce gun violence and violent crime, he said. Biden said much of the economic stimulus plan funding passed earlier this year will go to boosting state and local law enforcement budgets. Biden also talked about increasing resources for the Bureau of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or the ATF, to hold firearms dealers accountable for violating federal laws. The ATF will attempt to revoke the licenses of gun dealers the first time they transfer a gun to a prohibited person, if they fail to run a required background check, if they falsify records such as firearms transaction form, or if they fail to respond to an ATF tracing request, or if they refuse to permit the ATF to conduct an inspection in violation of the law. That's what Biden called a zero-tolerance policy for rogue gun dealers. Moreover, the ATF in some cases will embed with local homicide units to expand its National Integrated Ballistic Information Network Correlation and Training Center, the system that matches ballistics to crime scenes, from crime scenes to other ballistic evidence worldwide. A group of mayors and local law enforcement officials participated in Wednesday's event. People argue, why do you need gun laws if they don't know American cities that have tough laws? Don't believe that, Biden said. Mayors have the power to shape the laws in their cities, but they cannot control the laws in neighboring cities, and even if a gun legally bought there often ends up in their streets. And then there's this from FoxNews.com by Morgan Phillips. Biden touts new crime prevention strategy focused on gun control. He rejected the argument that the right to self-defense is needed to protect against potential government tyranny. President Biden, in remarks on Wednesday, said his crime prevention strategy would focus on strengthening background checks, banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and boosting community policing. Biden met with state and local leaders and law enforcement officials ahead of his remarks to talk crime prevention strategy amid a surge of violence in cities across the U.S. Both Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland, who spoke before him, pointed to a historic rise in crime in the summertime and said that rise may be more pronounced as the nation comes out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The White House has insisted curbing gun violence is key to tamping down a staggering surge of crime across the U.S. Talk to most responsible gun owners, and they'll tell you that there is no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a magazine, Biden said. Biden also took aim at an argument used by Second Amendment advocates that the right to self-defense needed to protect against potential government tyranny. Those who say the blood of patriots, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government, Biden said. If you think you're going to have, or if you think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. We're not changing the Constitution, we're enforcing it, the president continued. Biden touted zero tolerance for gun dealers who willfully violate the law and claimed that 90% of illegal guns found at crime scenes were traced back to 5% of gun dealers. The zero-tolerance policy targets federally licensed firearms dealers who willfully transfer a weapon to someone prohibited from owning one or ignore a tracing request from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The ATF would seek to revoke the dealer's license after the first offense, a senior White House official said. If you willfully sell a gun to someone who's prohibited from possessing it, or if you willfully fail to run a background check, if you willfully falsify a record, my message to you is this: we'll find you and we will seek your license to sell guns, Biden said. The National Rifle Association said the Biden initiative was an attempt to distract from the true causes of a rising crime. This is a political red herring aimed at hiding the real and abysmal failures of the Biden administration. NRS spokeswoman Amy Hunter told Fox News, crime rates are high because of the efforts to defund the police and a failure to prosecute career criminals. The simple fact is, strict enforcement of existing laws, including gun laws, coupled with support of law enforcement and prosecutors to do their jobs, would result in a dramatic decrease in crime, but the president would rather play politics and make Americans safer. Biden also boasted of historic funding for crime prevention in a $350 billion budget, or $350 billion for state and local governments, from the $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package that can be used by cities to hire law enforcement officers, pay overtime, prosecute gun traffickers and invest in technology to make law enforcement more efficient. Officials said the Biden administration hoped cities would choose to use the money for alternatives to policing too, and invest in community policing models. The administration has also taken aim at ghost guns and modified firearms, which are homemade firearms without serial numbers that can be used to trace them, making it difficult for law enforcement to determine where, by whom, or when they were manufactured and to whom they were sold. The Justice Department's ATF last month sought to update the legal definition of firearm in an effort to crack down on ghost guns. Biden also pushed hiring programs to keep young people busy and off the streets during the summer months, as they were often the target of perpetrators of such violence. Biden said that such programs encourage you to pick up a paycheck instead of a pistol. And the president said the DOJ has created 5 new strike forces to crack down on illegal gun trafficking cartels, and called on the Senate to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, thereby closing the boyfriend loophole to keep the guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. Now, I don't know about you, but my take on the First or Second Amendment is that it is the government that should be against it, and or rather that it is used to protect the government, because the Second Amendment clearly says a well-regulated militia being necessary to force the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, what I take that to mean is basically, anybody who has control of a firearm, irregardless of the size. Biden said that people need F-15s and nuclear weapons. I don't see that in there. And one other thing, if Biden says that the Second Amendment is used, only for muskets, I say that the First Amendment should only be used to pen and ink, or the original printing press, and doesn't have anything to do with the internet or social media. Which brings to mind another pet project, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which I might get to in a later article. But there's also this article from the American Thinker about gun control, about Biden's gun crime prevention speech, and how it was equal parts ludicrous and scary. This by Andrea Rydberg. With murder rates skyrocketing in major American cities, Joe Biden announced his gun crime prevention strategy. Because Democrats are opposed to punishments for crime, Biden was reduced to maligning the Second Amendment. Thankfully, he lacks the authority to grab our guns, but he managed a few chilling statements. Violent crime has dramatically escalated in Democrat-run cities and states, where Democrats have released violent prisoners, defunded, hamstrung and demoralized the police, decreased or done away with bail, and elected source-funded prosecutors who refuse to prosecute potential Democrat voters. As a Democrat, Biden could not promote stiffer prison penalties, meaningful bail, and aggressive prosecution. However, he did concede that police make a difference. Cities experiencing an increase in gun violence were able to use the American Rescue Plan dollars to hire police officers needed for community policing and to pay their overtime. And for folks at home, the American Rescue Plan, which is a once-in-a-generation investment to reduce violence in America, is available. I'm proud of it. It means more police officers, more nurses, more counselors, more social workers, more community violence interrupters to help resolve issues before they escalate into crimes. The real point of Biden's speech was grabbing guns. By the way, if the filibuster holds, Biden lacks the political might to pass gun-grabbing laws. His problem is that the cities with the worst violent crime already have gun-grabbing laws. Biden fell back on the old Chicago standby, saying that the illegal guns used to commit crimes in Democrat cities are smuggled in from states with lax gun laws, With these strike forces, local and federal law enforcement and prosecutors are going to be able to better coordinate the prosecution of illegal gun trafficking across city and state lines, so illegal guns sold from the back door of a gun shop in Virginia don't end up in a murder scene in Baltimore. Now, what Biden failed to explain is why these gun-supplying states also don't have out-of-control gun crime. Biden also insisted that the only reason to have weapons and ammo is deer hunting. Background checks for purchasing a firearm are important, and a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. No one needs to have a weapon that can fire over 30, 40, 50, even up to 100 rounds. Me, 100 rounds? Someone's been getting into the Geritol. Unless you think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests or something, community policing and programs that keep neighborhoods safe and keep folks out of trouble. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with deer hunting, and it's not the government's job to tell us what we need to defend ourselves, including against a tyrannical government. And that leads us to Biden's incoherent yet frightening attack on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, from the day it was passed, limited the type of people who can own a gun and what type of weapon you can own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, and all this stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government, well, the tree of liberty is not watered with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there have never been, if you wanted or if you think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s, maybe some type of nuclear weapons. The point is that there has always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it. A few points here. The first national gun control law limiting the type of guns Americans can own was in 1934, a mere 143 years after the Second Amendment was ratified. Following America's creation, though, the laws controlling who could own guns came from Democrats disarming blacks. Except for some renegade Southern Democrat branches of the NRA pushed rigorously to overturn those laws. Apparently, Thomas Jefferson was wrong when he said that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. In Biden's America, if you face the government, you better come prepared. Unless you're an unarmed citizen whom the Capitol Police welcome into the Capitol, then you're more dangerous than a nuclear bomb. In 2018, Larry Correia practically predicted Biden's attitude. By the way, this is a fedora tip to Glenn Reynolds over at Instapundit. I've had a caring liberal tell me that the example of Iraq doesn't apply because we kept the gloves on, whereas fighting America gun nuts would need to be a righteous total war with nothing held back. Holy crap, I've got to wonder about the mentality of people who demand rigorous ROEs to prevent civilian casualties in a foreign country. They're bloodthirsty enough to carpet bomb Texas. You really hate us and then act confused why we want to keep our guns? In the end, all Biden could do is say that he'll go after law-violating gun dealers. Still, his implied threat about turning the army on Americans should make everyone wary. And that is so very true right there. That's why the Second Amendment was enacted for people like Biden and for those on the liberal left. And there's a little more on this from Katie Pavlich over at Town Hall. Biden reminds gun owners the government has nuclear weapons. Speaking from the East Room of the White House Wednesday afternoon, President Joe Biden reintroduced his extreme gun control agenda, advocating for a ban on modern sporting rifles and reminding local lawful gun owners that the federal government has nuclear weapons. Those who say the blood of patriots, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government, Biden said, if you think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. And there's a tweet from townhall.com. Biden also falsely stated that the Clinton-era ban on modern sporting rifles, better known as the assault weapons ban, reduced crime. A 2004 Department of Justice-funded study from the University of Pennsylvania Center of Criminology concluded that the ban cannot be credited with a decrease in violence carried out with firearms. The report is titled, An Updated Assessment of the Federal Assault Weapons Ban, Impacts on Gun Markets and Gun Violence 1994 to 2003. We cannot clearly credit the ban with any of the weapons or any of the nation's recent drop in gun violence. And indeed, there has been no discernible reduction in the lethality and injuriousness of gun violence based on indicators like the percentage of gun crimes resulting in death or the share of gunfire incidents resulting in injury. The summary of the report on the study's findings states, the ban's impact on gun violence is likely to be small at best, and perhaps too small for reliable measurement. Assault weapons were used in no more than 8% of gun crimes, even before the ban. And another study from Quinnipiac University shows the same. The purpose of the present study is to determine the effects of state-level assault weapons bans and concealed weapons laws on state-level murder charges. Using data for the period 1980 to 2009 and controlling for state and year effects, the results of the present study suggest that states with restrictions on the carrying of concealed weapons had higher gun-related murder rates than other states, the study concluded. It was also found that assault weapons bans did not significantly affect murder rates at the state level. These results suggest that restrictive concealed weapons laws may cause an increase in gun-related murders at the state level. Breaking 911 tweeted out Biden's quote, no one needs to have a weapon that can fire over 30, 40, 50, even up to 100 rounds, unless you think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests or something. Biden also falsely stated that cities with the highest crime rates, like Chicago, Baltimore, and New York, don't already have strict gun control laws. They do. Breaking 911 tweeted out, the gun lobby wants you to believe that cities that have the toughest gun laws still have the highest rates of gun violence. Don't believe it. To which Katie Pavlich tweeted at, or rather replied, except for it is completely true. Chicago, New York, Baltimore, etc. Throughout his remarks, Biden failed to hold the Defunding Police movement accountable for skyrocketing violent crime rates, but vowed to bail out Democrat mayors with federal tax dollars to hire more police. Now, I'm a little leery about it. So, I mean, I personally do not carry a gun, even though I would like to, but there are just certain things that I wouldn't say prohibit, but recommend that I do not carry a gun. But that's personal, and I'll be interested in hearing just how the Republicans in the Senate and in the House respond to it. Leave a comment down below your thoughts on Biden's federal gun law grab or federal gun law suggestion, as he calls it. What do you think of that? If you live in Chicago, Baltimore, or New York, or any of the other high gun law cities, let me know your comments on and thoughts on what Biden said. I'll leave a link to the articles that I've read in the show notes below, and I'll see you in the next video. Derek Chauvin was discharged in the murder of George Floyd. If you will remember, Chauvin was convicted of murder back in April. He was convicted of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. And today was the sentencing by the judge. This coming from NBCnews.com, and it says, Derek Chauvin sentenced to 22 and a half years for the murder of George Floyd. Prosecutors had asked that Chauvin receive 30 years in prison. His lawyer sought probation. This by Janelle Griffith. Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer charged in the murder, convicted of murder and the death of George Floyd, was sentenced Friday to 22 and a half years in prison, closing a chapter on a case that sparked global outrage and protest. He was granted credit for time served. Prosecutors had asked that Chauvin receive 30 years in prison. His lawyer sought probation. Hennepin County District Judge Peter Cahill said the sentence was not based on public opinion, emotion, or sympathy. He said he was not trying to send any messages. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd, Cahill told Chauvin. The judge said he also wanted to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. Hours before the hearing began, Cahill denied a request from Chauvin's attorney for a new trial. Cahill also denied a request to hold a hearing on juror misconduct. Chauvin was convicted in April of second and third-degree murder as well as second-degree manslaughter. He spoke briefly before the sentence was announced. At this time, due to some additional legal matters at hand, I'm not able to give a full formal statement, Chauvin said. I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that will be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. The sentencing hearing began with statements from 4 of Floyd's family members. Floyd's daughter Gianna, his brothers Terrence and Philanice Floyd, and his nephew Brandon Williams all spoke at the hearing. Gianna, who appeared by video, said she asked about her father all the time and misses that he is not around to help her brush her teeth at night. I want to play with them, have fun, go on a plane ride, the 7-year-old said. Philanice Floyd said he had begged every day for justice to be served. George's life mattered, he said. I am asking that you please find it suitable to give Officer Chauvin the maximum sentence possible. My family and I have been given a life sentence. Chauvin's mother, Carolyn Paulenti, also spoke during the hearing. Paulenti called Chauvin a good man. Derek is quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and selfless man, she said. Paulenti said her son's identity has been reduced to that of a racist. Even though I have not spoken publicly, I have always supported him 100% and always will, Paulenti said. Now under Minnesota statutes, Chauvin can be sentenced only on the most serious charge, unintentional second-degree murder, which has a maximum sentence of 40 years. Cahill could have sentenced Chauvin to as little as 10 years and 8 months or as much as 15 years in prison and remain within sentencing guidelines. The presumptive sentence for a person like Chauvin who had no criminal history is 12.5 years for second-degree murder. Last month, Cahill ruled that prosecutors had proven there were aggravating factors in Floyd's death, paving the way for a longer sentence. Floyd, a black man, was handcuffed in a prone position on the street May 25, 2020 as Chauvin, who was white, knelt on his neck for 9.5 minutes while Floyd said he couldn't breathe and went limp. Floyd's gruesome death, captured in a harrowing bystander video that was posted on Facebook and widely viewed, ignited a reckoning on racial disparities in America and fueled calls for police reform. In arguing for a 30-year sentence, prosecutors said there were 5 aggravating factors in Floyd's death. In his ruling last month, Cahill wrote that the prosecution had proven 4 of those factors. Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority, treated Floyd with particular cruelty, and that he committed his crime in the presence of children who witnessed the last moments of Floyd's life, and with the active participation of 3 other people. By the way, Cahill said prosecutors did not prove that Floyd was particularly vulnerable. It was particularly cruel to kill George Floyd slowly by preventing his ability to breathe when Mr. Floyd had already made it clear he was having trouble breathing, Cahill wrote. Floyd was begging for his life and obviously terrified by the knowledge that he was likely to die, but Chauvin remained indifferent to his pleas. Cahill also wrote, Chauvin's conviction was a rare occurrence and is unusual for police officers to be prosecuted for killing someone on the job. Philip Stinson, a criminal justice professor at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, has found through his research that Chauvin is one of only 11 non-federal law enforcement officers, such as police officers, deputy sheriffs, and state troopers, who have been convicted of murder for on-duty killings since 2005. Chauvin and the 3 other former police officers involved in Floyd's arrest, J. Alexander King, Thomas Lane, and Tu Thao, were fired on the day after Floyd's death. They were also awaiting trial in federal court on charges of violating Floyd's civil rights. No trial has yet been set. Cahill delayed the trial of King, Lane, and Thao, who were charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder and aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter, and whose trial was originally scheduled to begin in August to March 2022. saying last month that he wanted to put some distance between their trial and Chauvin's trial. Cahill also said he wanted them to be tried on the federal charges first. And then there's this from the Huffington Post. Derek Chauvin sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. The former Minneapolis police officer was convicted in April of murder and manslaughter on the death of George Floyd. A Minnesota judge sentenced former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on Friday to 22.5 years in prison for the May 2020 murder of George Floyd. He is also banned from possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of his life. Per the order of the Minneapolis Police Department to give citizens voice and respect, wrote Judge Peter Cahill in a 22-page brief laying out his rationale for the sentence. Here, Mr. Chauvin, rather than pursuing the MPD mission, treated Mr. Floyd without respect and denied him the dignity owed to all human beings, and which he certainly would have extended to a friend or neighbor. Chauvin was convicted in April of second and third-degree murder, as well as second-degree manslaughter in Floyd's death. He has since been held at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Oak Park Heights, the state's only maximum security prison, about 25 miles east of Minneapolis. Shortly before his sentence was handed down, the former officer stood up to address the court for the first time. I want to give my condolences to the Floyd family, Chauvin said, adding that he was not able to give a full formal statement because of some legal matters at hand. He ended on a cryptic note. There's going to be some other information in the future that will be of interest, and I hope things will give you peace of mind, Chauvin told the Floyd family. Chauvin, who was white, was one of 3 officers to pin Floyd, a black man, face down on the street during an arrest attempt. Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds as Floyd repeatedly stated that he couldn't breathe and eventually ceased breathing. 4 members of Floyd's family spoke in court before the sentencing, including his young daughter Gianna, who recalled how her father would help her brush her teeth every night before bed. I love you and miss you, Gianna said, addressing her father in a video shown to the court. 2 of Floyd's brothers, Terrence and Phineas Floyd, along with the nephew, Brandon Williams, asked Judge Peter Cahill to impose a maximum sentence on Chauvin. Terrence Floyd said his family was now part of a group of black people whose loved ones were killed by police in America, adding, "It's now one of those fraternities that you enjoy." He then told the judge how desperately he wanted answers from Chauvin. What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck? Floyd's death sparked massive months-long protests across the country and an international reckoning with police brutality and racial injustice. Hours before Friday's sentencing, Judge Peter Cahill denied a defense motion for a new trial. He also ruled that Chauvin's team failed to demonstrate prosecutorial or juror misconduct. Prosecutors filed a memorandum earlier this month asking Cahill to sentence Chauvin to the maximum of 30 years behind bars. Chauvin's legal team requested that he receive probation or a shorter sentence term. He will receive credit for time already served, 199 days. Cahill, who oversaw Chauvin's high-profile trial, ruled last month that the former officer could receive an aggravated prison sentence, one that would be tougher than Minnesota's sentencing guidelines. The judge said Chauvin abused his position of authority and treated Floyd with particular cruelty. On Friday, the court heard for the first time from Chauvin's mother, Carolyn Paulenti, who read a statement that touched on her son's childhood dream of becoming a police officer, as well as how he has been portrayed in the media. The public will never know the loving and caring man he is, but his family does, Paulenti said. Even though I have never spoken publicly, I have always supported him 100%, and I always will. Now, do I agree with the sentence? Yes, I do. I mean, there is no humane way that there could have been a humane way for this to go down, but they just didn't seem to want to do it. But I'm thinking that this will be interesting. It'll be interesting to see just what happens to the 3 other officers who were on federal trial But yeah, 22 and a half years. Maximum on there was 40. I say that's pretty decent. And then there's also this from Newsweek. And if I can, here we go. From Newsweek, 42, with Derek Chauvin sentenced 22 years in prison after prosecution requested 30. Here's a video of this, which I won't play, but you can watch it at your own leisure. But it says, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison for the murder of George Floyd, a black man who was killed last year after Chauvin kneeled on his neck. Judge Peter Cahill handed down the sentence on Friday, siding with prosecutors who asked him to impose a sentence of 30 years. In April, almost a year after Floyd's death sparked nationwide outrage, Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 counts against him following a jury deliberation of about 10 hours. Cahill only provided brief remarks before announcing his decision, saying he opted to issue a 22-page memorandum instead. The judge said the goal of the memorandum was to highlight that sentencing is based on a legal analysis that involves applying the rule of law to an individual case and not emotion. I'm not going to attempt to be profound or clever because it's not the appropriate time, Cahill said. I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I am not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. Ahead of sentencing, the defense shared several victim impact statements, and the court heard from Floyd's 7-year-old daughter, Gianna. Although her father's gone physically, she said she's still around in his spirit and she's excited to play with him again. I miss you and love you, Gianna said in a message to her dad. The judge also heard from Floyd's nephew and his brothers, Philinus and Terrence Floyd. Karen said that the families become part of a group of people who have lost a loved one due to police violence, noting that it's a fraternity that no one wants to be a part of. Chauvin, who was found guilty of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, said he hoped he would avoid jail time. In court documents, his attorney, Eric Nelson, asked Cahill to sentence his client to probation. He argued that his client was a model defendant for probation and raised concerns about how he would be treated in prison. Nelson also credited Chauvin for the respect he showed the judicial process and Cahill in the face of unparalleled public scorn. Carolyn Pawlenty, Chauvin's mother, was the only person to speak in behalf of her son, telling the judge that it was difficult to deal with the characterization of Chauvin during the trial, and in the media she called her son a good man, denied that he was racist, and told the judge that she supported him 100% and always will. Derek has played over and over in his head the event of the days. I've seen the toll it has taken on him, Pawlenty told Cahill. When you sentence my son, you will also be sentencing me. Chances that Chauvin would avoid jail time were extremely slim, given that in May, Cahill found aggravating factors, including Chauvin's abuse of his position of trust and authority, warranted a potentially stronger sentence than the guidelines. In the event Cahill didn't agree with giving Chauvin probation, Nelson argued in a court filing that because Chauvin had a criminal history score of 0, the appropriate maximum sentence would be 15 years with a presumptive duration of about 12 and a half years. Sentencing guidelines suggest a sentence of 10 to 15 years, but the maximum sentence for second-degree murder, the most serious charge that he was convicted of, is 40 years. Nelson told Chauvin that he wasn't aware he was committing a crime and described his crime as an error made in good faith reliance on his own experience as a police officer. Prosecutors didn't see it that way, though, and Assistant Attorney General Matthew Frank called it so outside the realm of reality. The state asked for double the maximum sentence the guidelines set forth, given the existence of 4 aggravating factors and the extreme nature of Chauvin's conduct. Defendant brutally murdered Mr. Floyd, or abusing the authority conferred by his badge, prosecutors told the judge. No sentence can undo the damage the defendant's actions have inflicted. But the sentence the court imposes must hold defendant fully accountable for his reprehensible conduct. Floyd's death sparked nationwide statements and the trial drew international attention. During the 2 weeks of testimony, jurors heard about the guilt witnesses, including Darnella Frazier, who filmed the arrest but felt for not intervening. They also heard Donald Williams, a mixed martial arts fighter who witnessed Floyd's death, called it a murder on a 911 call, and likened Chauvin's positioning as a kill choke in MMA. After the guilty verdict was handed down, Floyd's family expressed relief and gratitude, and Ben Crump, their attorney, called it a historical moment for the legacy of trying to make America for all Americans. And there is this from thehill.com. Chauvin sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison for murder of George Floyd. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison on Friday afternoon for the murder of George Floyd last May, handed down by Hennepin County District Court Judge Peter Cahill. The sentence was greater than what legal experts predicted, determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. Cahill said from the Hennepin County Courthouse just after 2:30 p.m. Central. The sentence is not based on emotion or sympathy. At the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. The increased sentence comes after the judge in May agreed with prosecutors that there were aggravating factors when Chauvin fatally knelt down on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. That warranted a departure from the presumptive sentence length. Cahill, in his earlier ruling, concluded that Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority as a police officer and displayed particular cruelty when he knelt on Floyd's neck during his arrest, an action that rendered Floyd unresponsive. Floyd was later pronounced dead at a nearby hospital on April 20. Chauvin was convicted of second-degree murder and manslaughter as well as third-degree murder. Now, since the criminal count stemmed from one action, Chauvin killing Floyd, the sentence is based on only the second-degree murder conviction, the most serious of the crimes for which he is found guilty. Per state guidelines, the maximum sentence for unintentional murder in the second degree is 40 years, but because Chauvin has no previous criminal record, the presumptive sentence was 12 and a half years with an acceptable deviation range of 10 years, 9 months to 15 years. But because Cahill agreed with the prosecution's aggravating factors motion, the judge had the discretion to increase the sentence. The common prediction among legal experts was that Cahill would decide on a 30-year sentence, double the high end of the presumptive sentence, and it was what the lead head prosecutor, Minnesota Attorney General Democrat Keith Ellison, requested in a motion at the beginning of the month. Members of Floyd's family were present in the courtroom for the hearing. Floyd's murder was a catalyst for nationwide protests decrying police brutality and systemic racism last summer. His death also spurred the creation of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, a sweeping police reform bill that Congress has been working to reach a bipartisan consensus on for months. Chauvin declined to give a formal statement in court due to additional legal matters, but expressed his condolences to the Floyd family. He also said that there would be some other information in the future that would be of interest. Now, like I said earlier, I thought that it would be about 20 to 25, but, the judge handed down 22 and a half. So that's pretty much about halfway between 20 and 25, which is semi-good. I had also thought that it would be consecutive, but that there would be 3 different sentences and that they would all serve concurrently also, but but this works out pretty well, and that ends this saga, at least for now, because, like I said, there is federal civil rights violation charges for Chauvin's 3 accomplices, so let's see just what happens there. In the comments down below, let me know what you think of Derek Chauvin's sentencing. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? What do you think the sentence should have been? I will also leave a link to the articles in the show notes below, and I will see you in the next video. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Mick Bulow. Again, if you like what you watched, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.